The courtroom fell silent as Celeste Washington stood at the podium, her tailored navy suit contrasting sharply with the pale faces of the airline executives seated across from her. 6 months ago, she was just another passenger humiliated on Flight 447. Today, she held the keys to their entire company. But how did a single phone call transform a travel nightmare into the acquisition of a lifetime? The answer began 30,000 feet above Denver. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice and triumph, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you believe in standing up against injustice, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless. Trust me, you do not want to miss a single moment of how one woman turned humiliation into the ultimate power move. Celeste Washington sat in her corner office on the 42nd floor of a San Francisco high-rise, the afternoon sun casting golden light across polished mahogany furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Bay Bridge. At 42 years old, she had built Washington Innovations from a single-room startup into a $2 billion artificial intelligence and machine learning empire that partnered with 3 Fortune 500 companies. Her executive assistant Priya knocked softly before entering with a tablet displaying contract signatures still warm from digital ink. The journey to this moment had been anything but easy. Born in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Montgomery, Alabama, Celeste grew up watching her single mother work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Scholarships became her lifeline, first to a magnet high school, then to MIT, where she studied computer science while working nights at the campus library. After graduation, she spent 5 years at tech giants learning the ropes before taking the leap that terrified everyone around her, cashing out her meager savings to launch Washington Innovations in a shared co-working space. The first year she lived on ramen noodles and determination. The second year she landed her first major client. By year 5, Forbes named her to their 30 under 40 list. Now her face appeared on magazine covers with headlines like Breaking Barriers in Silicon Valley and The Woman Redefining Tech Leadership. Priya set down a leather portfolio and said the San Francisco deals are finalized. All 3 contracts signed. Legal wants you to review the European expansion presentation before the New York meetings. Celeste nodded already, mentally shifting gears. The New York Investor Summit could unlock $50 million in funding for her European market entry, a strategic move that would position Washington Innovations as a truly global player. But first, she needed to get there rested and prepared. She glanced at her calendar. Book me first class to New York. I need to work on the flight and arrive sharp. Priya's fingers flew across her tablet. Routing through Denver. Skyward Airlines has the best timing. Seat 2A. Departing tomorrow at 9 a.m. Confirmed. The confirmation email arrived moments later. $2,300 for first-class service. San Francisco to Denver to New York. Celeste barely glanced at the price. She had earned the right to fly comfortably, to have space to spread out her laptop and refine pitch decks without cramped middle seats and crying babies. This was not extravagance. This was necessity. That evening, Celeste packed methodically in her Pacific Heights townhouse, folding silk blouses and tailored blazers into a carry-on roller bag alongside her laptop containing confidential financial projections and market analysis. Her phone buzzed with a FaceTime call from her daughter Amara, a 17-year-old junior at a prestigious East Coast boarding school. Amara's face filled the screen, her natural hair pulled into a high puff, eyes bright with teenage energy. "Mom, you work too hard. When are you coming to visit?" Celeste smiled. "Soon, baby, I promise. Right after this New York trip." They talked for 20 minutes about calculus, homework, and college applications before Amara said, "Mom, I'm proud of you. You've shown me that we can achieve anything." After hanging up, Celeste felt that familiar swell of purpose. Everything she built was not just for herself but for Amara's generation, proof that Black women could rise to the highest levels of business and stay there. The next morning, Celeste arrived at San Francisco International Airport in her Tesla parking in the executive lot before wheeling her bag toward the Skyward Airlines check-in counter. The terminal hummed with early morning travelers, the smell of coffee and pastries wafting from nearby kiosks. She approached the counter, where a young white woman named Rachel stood behind the desk, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to something else entirely when she looked up at Celeste. "Good morning. Checking in for Flight 447 to Denver," Celeste said pleasantly, handing over her ID and phone with the mobile boarding pass displayed. Rachel took the documents, her eyes narrowing slightly as she scanned the first-class ticket. "Ma'am, are you sure this is your ticket?" The question hung in the air like an insult. Celeste felt her stomach tighten but kept her voice level. "Yes, I booked it 2 days ago. Is there a problem?" Rachel examined the ID for far longer than necessary, turning it over as if checking for forgeries, then typed slowly into her computer while glancing repeatedly at Celeste. "Just a moment," she said, before picking up the phone and speaking in hushed tones. Minutes crawled by as other passengers moved efficiently through adjacent counters. Finally, a supervisor named Brad appeared, a middle-aged white man with thinning hair and a forced smile. He took Celeste's documents, reviewed them with exaggerated thoroughness, then said, "Everything seems to be in order. Enjoy your flight, Miss Washington." His tone carried a condescending note, as if he were doing her a favor by allowing her to use a ticket she had purchased with her own money. Celeste thanked him, curtly retrieved her documents, and walked towards security, feeling eyes on her back. At the security checkpoint, a TSA agent waved her toward the standard line, but then another agent called out, "Random selection for additional screening." Of course, Celeste had flown hundreds of times and understood that random was rarely random when you were black. She stood with arms outstretched while a female agent patted her down, opened her carry-on, swabbed her laptop for explosives, all while other passengers breezed through automated scanners. 15 minutes later, she finally collected her belongings and headed to the gate, her jaw clenched, but her composure intact. She had fought too hard and climbed too high to let airport indignities rattle her. Still, a small voice in her head whispered the truth she tried to ignore, no matter how successful she became. Some people would always see her skin before her accomplishments. At Gate 23, Celeste found a seat near the window and opened her laptop, determined to use the wait time productively. The European expansion presentation needed polish, and she lost herself in adjusting slides and refining talking points. When the gate agent announced boarding for first-class passengers, Celeste packed up and joined the priority line, her boarding pass ready. As she handed it to the gate agent, another moment of scrutiny. The agent, a white woman in her 50s, scanned the barcode twice, frowned, then scanned it a third time before finally nodding. "Have a nice flight." Celeste walked down the jet bridge, feeling a growing unease that she could not quite name, a sense that today was going to test her in ways she had not anticipated. The aircraft door opened into the first-class cabin, revealing 8 spacious leather seats arranged in a 2-to-2 configuration, soft overhead lighting, creating an atmosphere of exclusivity and comfort. Celeste located seat 2A on the left side, a window seat that would give her privacy and a place to rest her head during the flight. She lifted her carry-on into the overhead bin, then settled into the seat, appreciating the extra legroom and the width that allowed her to breathe, without elbows invading her space. The passenger in seat 2B had not yet arrived, leaving her a moment of peace to arrange her things. As she pulled out her iPad and noise-canceling headphones, a white male passenger appeared in the aisle, pausing when he saw Celeste. Gregory was 60 years old, wearing an expensive charcoal suit with a Rolex glinting on his wrist, his silver hair perfectly combed. He looked at the seat number above Celeste's head, then at her confusion flickering across his face, before he slid into seat 2B without a word. But his body language spoke volumes, shoulders angled away, briefcase positioned as a barrier, lips pressed into a thin line of discomfort. Celeste felt it immediately, that familiar tension when white people encountered black excellence in spaces they considered their own. Moments later, a flight attendant approached. Diane was 45 years old, with auburn hair and sharp blue eyes that assessed Celeste with barely concealed suspicion. "Excuse me, miss, may I see your boarding pass?" Her tone was not a request, but a demand, disguised in politeness. Celeste looked up, surprise giving way to annoyance. "Certainly," she said, retrieving the boarding pass from her jacket pocket and handing it over. Diane examined it closely, tilting it toward the light, as if searching for counterfeit marks, then said, there might be a mistake. Let me verify this." Before Celeste could respond, Diane walked away toward the front galley. Celeste took a slow breath, willing herself to remain calm. She had paid for this seat. She had every right to be here. But the knot in her stomach tightened as minutes passed and other passengers boarded, casting curious glances her way. When Diane returned, she brought reinforcements, a supervisor named Kenneth, a white man in his early 50s, wearing a Skyward Airlines blazer with gold epaulets, denoting authority. Kenneth stopped beside Celeste's row and said in a low voice, meant to sound discreet but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "Ma'am, we have a situation. There seems to be an overbooking in first class." Celeste felt her pulse quicken. "Overbooking, I received my confirmation 3 days ago. I checked in this morning without any issues." Kenneth glanced at Gregory, then back at Celeste. "Yes, but we need to move some passengers to accommodate certain guests. We can offer you a seat in Economy Plus and a $200 voucher for future travel." The words hit like a slap. They were asking her to give up her paid seat, not because of any legitimate overbooking, but because they wanted to make room for someone else, someone they deemed more deserving. Celeste's voice remained steady but gained an edge of steel. "I paid full price for this seat, $2,300. I am not moving." Kenneth's expression hardened. "Ma'am, we need your cooperation. We have premium members who require these seats." The implication was clear. She was not a premium member in their eyes, despite flying Skyward 20 times a year. Celeste leaned forward slightly. "I am a premium member. My account number is 478921. I have gold status. Now please explain to me why you are asking me to move when there are empty seats." She gestured toward seat 3C across the aisle, which sat vacant. Kenneth followed her gesture, then said dismissively, "Those are reserved for crew rest or operational needs. Look, we are trying to resolve this amicably. If you refuse to cooperate, we will have no choice but to involve the captain." Other passengers were now fully engaged in the drama unfolding, some with phones raised recording the interaction. Gregory muttered under his breath, "Just move already, you are holding up the flight." Celeste turned to him, eyes blazing. "I am holding up nothing. I am sitting in my assigned paid seat." But she knew how this would end. She had seen enough viral videos of black passengers dragged off planes to understand the power dynamics at play. Before she could say more, Captain Fletcher entered the cabin from the flight deck. He was 58 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with graying brown hair and a weathered face that suggested decades in the cockpit. His uniform was crisp, his pilot wings gleaming, his presence commanding immediate attention. Kenneth stepped aside to brief him quietly, both men glancing at Celeste. Then Captain Fletcher approached his smile, not reaching his eyes. "Ma'am, I am Captain Fletcher. I understand there is a concern about seating." His tone was patronizing, the voice of someone accustomed to obedience. Celeste met his gaze directly. "The only concern is that your crew is asking me to give up my paid seat without legitimate cause." Captain Fletcher's smile faded. "We have no space in first class for additional passengers. Operational requirements dictate that we need you to move to economy. We can offer you a voucher and priority boarding on your next flight." The coded language was not lost on Celeste. No space, despite empty seats. Operational requirements that somehow only applied to her. She pointed again at the empty seat across the aisle. "That seat is empty. Explain why I cannot remain here while that seat stays vacant." Captain Fletcher's jaw tightened. "That seat is reserved." "Ma'am, I am trying to be reasonable, but if you do not comply, we have the authority to remove you from this aircraft. I do not want to escalate this situation, but I will if necessary." His words were a threat, barely wrapped in procedure. Around them, passengers shifted uncomfortably, a few murmuring support for Celeste, but most remaining silent, unwilling to intervene. Celeste felt rage boiling beneath her composed exterior, but she also felt the weight of reality. If she refused, they would call security. She would be removed, possibly arrested, definitely humiliated on a far grander scale. Her business reputation could suffer. Her daughter would see her mother dragged off a plane on social media. The injustice of it all was suffocating, but survival instincts honed over 42 years of navigating a world that often saw her as less than kicked in. She stood slowly, gathering her belongings. "Fine. I will move. But you will hear from me." Her voice was quiet, but carried a promise that made Captain Fletcher's smug expression flicker for just a moment. As Celeste walked toward the back of the plane, carrying her bag past rows of economy passengers cramming into narrow seats, she heard the whispers. "Probably didn't even pay for that ticket," always causing drama. "Why can't they just follow the rules?" Each comment was a knife, but she kept her head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She found her new seat, 28B, a middle seat squeezed between a teenage boy blasting music through barely their earbuds and a large man whose shoulders and legs invaded her already minimal space. As she buckled in, tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. Not here, not now. The flight to Denver was 2 hours of misery. Celeste could not open her laptop. The boy's elbow jutted into her ribs every time he shifted, and the man beside her snored loudly, his head lolling onto her shoulder twice before she nudged him awake. The economy cabin smelled of recycled air and someone's tuna sandwich, the overhead bins crammed so full that latecomers shoved bags under seats, further reducing legroom. Every few minutes, Celeste's mind replayed the confrontation, Captain Fletcher's condescending tone, Kenneth's dismissive gestures, the way they looked at her as if she were an inconvenience rather than a paying customer. A flight attendant named Keisha, a black woman in her 30s with her hair in neat braids, came through with the beverage cart. When she reached Celeste's row, their eyes met, and Keisha's expression softened with understanding. As she handed Celeste a ginger ale, she leaned in slightly and whispered, "I saw what happened up there. I am so sorry." Celeste managed a tight smile. "Does this happen often?" Keisha glanced around to ensure no supervisors were listening, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "More than you would think. They never do it to certain people." The confirmation was both validating and infuriating. This was not an isolated incident. This was a pattern. When the plane finally touched down in Denver, Celeste remained seated as passengers scrambled to retrieve luggage and rushed toward their connections. She watched through the window as ground crews worked efficiently on the tarmac, the Rocky Mountains rising in the distance under a clear blue sky. Eventually, she gathered her things and deplaned one of the last passengers to exit. In the jet bridge, she saw Captain Fletcher and Diane walking ahead, laughing about something. Fletcher said loudly enough for her to hear, another entitled one who thought she could, but he stopped mid-sentence when he turned and saw Celeste a few feet behind him. Their eyes locked for a heartbeat before he turned away and continued walking. Celeste felt her hands clench into fists. She made her way to the United Club Lounge using her membership card for access. The lounge was quiet, a refuge of leather chairs and complimentary snacks, business travelers hunched over laptops or napping in corner seats. Celeste found a spot near the window overlooking the concourse and opened her laptop with shaking hands. She pulled up her email and found 3 messages from Priya, sent within the last hour. The subject lines read Skyward Airlines research, and attached were detailed reports compiled with the efficiency Celeste had come to rely on. The first document outlined basic company information. Skyward Airlines was a regional carrier founded in 1978, operating primarily in the western United States with hubs in Denver and Seattle. Current ownership belonged to Thornton Aviation Group, a family-held company controlled by Harrison Thornton III, a 65-year-old heir to an aviation fortune, but the financials told a grimmer story. Skyward had posted losses for 3 consecutive years, hemorrhaging cash as larger carriers undercut prices and siphoned away customers. The company carried approximately $400 million in debt, and its stock price had plummeted 60% over the past 2 years. The second document contained recent news articles. Several mentioned that Skyward was actively seeking a buyer or major investor, with negotiations ongoing with Whitmore Capital, a private equity firm known for aggressive cost-cutting. However, those talks had stalled over valuation disagreements, leaving Skyward in financial limbo. Employee morale was reportedly low, with rumors of potential layoffs if a deal did not materialize soon. More troubling were the references to lawsuits. A quick search revealed that Skyward had settled multiple discrimination complaints over the past 5 years, all under non-disclosure agreements that kept details hidden from public view. The third document was a deep dive into complaints filed with the Department of Transportation. Priya had somehow accessed records showing 17 formal complaints in the last 5 years alone, nearly all from passengers of color, alleging discriminatory treatment, being moved from first class without cause, subjected to extra security screening, denied boarding despite valid tickets, or receiving inferior service compared to white passengers. Captain Fletcher's name appeared in 3 of those complaints. Yet he remained employed, his record apparently clean enough to continue flying. Celeste sat back, her mind racing. This was not just about her. This was systemic rot, a culture that allowed and even encouraged discrimination. And Skyward was vulnerable, desperate for cash, bleeding money, its reputation tarnished. An idea began to form, audacious and terrifying in equal measure. She picked up her phone and called Leonard Torres, her chief financial officer, a sharp-minded strategist who had helped guide Washington innovations through several critical funding rounds. Leonard answered on the second ring. "Celeste, how was the flight?" His voice was warm, familiar. She skipped pleasantries. "Leo, I need you to run numbers on an acquisition target." A pause. "Which company?" Celeste took a breath. "Skyward Airlines." Another pause, longer this time. "The regional carrier, Celeste. They are bleeding money. Why would we want to acquire an airline? We are a tech company." She could hear the confusion in his voice, the concern that his CEO was making an emotional rather than strategic decision. "Just run the numbers," Celeste said firmly. "Tell me what it would take to acquire them outright. Full ownership. I want to know the price, the financing options, the timeline." Leonard sighed but agreed. "I will need to review their financials in detail, but based on public data and their debt load, you are probably looking at $600 to $700 million. We would need to liquidate some assets, potentially take on leverage, and it would significantly impact our balance sheet." "This is a major move, Celeste." "Can you tell me why?" Celeste watched a Skyward plane taxi past the window, its blue and white livery bright in the afternoon sun. "They need to learn that they cannot treat people like dirt, especially not me. Get me a full acquisition proposal by tomorrow morning." Leonard hesitated, then said quietly, "Understood. I will get the team on it." After hanging up, Celeste stared at her laptop screen, the weight of what she was contemplating settling over her. Buying an airline was insane. It was outside Washington Innovation's core business, a risky diversification that would stretch their resources and invite scrutiny from investors and the media. But it was also an opportunity to strike back, to take something broken and rebuild it with values that mattered. Justice, equity, respect. She thought about her daughter Amara, about the world she wanted to leave behind, a world where a black woman could sit in first class without being questioned, doubted, humiliated. An announcement echoed through the lounge. Flight 889 to New York, now boarding all passengers. Celeste closed her laptop and gathered her things. This flight would be economy again, since her original first-class ticket had been invalidated by the forced move. As she walked toward the gate, she felt different than she had 2 hours ago. The humiliation was still there, burning hot beneath her skin, but it was now fuel rather than poison. She was not just a victim. She was a woman with resources, with power, with the ability to change the rules of the game, and she fully intended to do exactly that. 2 days later, Celeste sat in the top-floor conference room of Washington Innovation's Manhattan headquarters, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city skyline as morning light streamed across a polished oak table. Around her sat her leadership team, Leonard Torres, with his perpetually furrowed brow and tablet covered in financial projections. Jasmine Lee, the chief operating officer whose calm demeanor masked a ruthless efficiency. Devin Wright, general counsel, and a former federal prosecutor who had joined the company specifically because he believed in Celeste's vision of ethical business. And Priya, ever present, with her own tablet, ready to take notes and execute orders with precision. Celeste stood at the head of the table and said without preamble, "We are acquiring Skyward Airlines." The room went silent. Leonard had warned them, but hearing it stated so definitively still landed like a bombshell. Jasmine spoke first. "Celeste, I understand you had a terrible experience, and what happened was absolutely wrong. But acquiring an airline, that is a massive leap from artificial intelligence and machine learning." "What is the strategic rationale?" It was a fair question, and Celeste had spent the past 48 hours refining her answer. Diversification. Celeste began pacing slightly as she spoke, her energy filling the room. Washington Innovations has grown rapidly, but we are vulnerable to market shifts in tech. Airlines represent hard assets, planes, routes, landing slots, physical infrastructure that can hedge against digital volatility. Skyward is undervalued right now, precisely because it is poorly managed and bleeding money. But underneath the dysfunction, there is a viable business. They have established routes in the western United States, contracts with airports, a workforce, and a customer base. With proper leadership, operational improvements, and integration of our technology into their systems, we can turn it around. That is the business case. She paused, letting that sink in, then continued. But there is another reason. Justice. Skyward has a documented pattern of discrimination. 17 formal complaints with the Department of Transportation in 5 years. Dozens more on social media. They settle quietly, silence victims with non-disclosure agreements, and continue operating as if nothing is wrong. I want to hold them accountable. I want to show that you cannot treat people like garbage and get away with it. Devon leaned forward, his dark eyes intent. I am with you on principle, Celeste. But we need to ensure this makes business sense, not just emotional sense. Investors will ask hard questions. The media will scrutinize every move. If we cannot turn Skyward around financially, this could hurt Washington Innovations' reputation and stock price. Celeste nodded, appreciating his candor. That is why we are going to do this right. We bring in experienced airline operators. We invest in modernization. We make Skyward profitable while also making it just. Those two goals are not mutually exclusive. Leonard pulled up a presentation on the large screen at the end of the room. Here are the numbers. Skyward's current market valuation is approximately $550 million, depressed due to 3 years of losses and mounting debt. Total debt load is $400 million. To acquire them outright, we are looking at $675 million, give or take. Washington Innovations has cash reserves of $1.2 billion, so we can afford it, but it represents more than half our liquid assets. We would need to finance part of the acquisition, likely through a combination of cash and debt instruments. I have spoken with Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan. Both are willing to structure deals, but they want assurances that we have a solid turnaround plan. Jasmine studied the projections. What about regulatory approval? You cannot just buy an airline without oversight. Devon answered, we will need approval from the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Transportation. That process typically takes 3 to 6 months, assuming no major red flags. They will review our financials, our management plan, and our ability to operate safely. Given Celeste's track record and Washington Innovations' stability, I do not foresee major obstacles, but it is not guaranteed. Celeste absorbed this information, her mind already working through contingencies. Priya raised her hand tentatively. What about public perception? When this becomes public, people will have opinions. Some will support you, but others will accuse you of being vindictive or wasting company resources on a personal vendetta. Celeste had thought about this extensively. We control the narrative. We position this as both a smart business move and a social justice initiative. We show that profitability and principles can coexist. And frankly, I do not care if some people think I am being vindictive. Maybe I am, but I am also being strategic. The team spent the next 3 hours diving into details. Leonard outlined financing options, Jasmine began sketching operational improvements, and Devon assigned his legal team to start gathering evidence of discrimination for use in negotiations and potential regulatory hearings. They identified key targets: Harrison Thornton III, the owner who desperately needed an exit; Whitmore Capital, the private equity firm whose stalled deal could be leveraged; and the pilots' union, which would need to be won over to avoid labor strife. As the meeting concluded, Leonard said, "If we move fast and create urgency, we could have a term sheet in 2 weeks." Celeste shook her head. "Make it 1 week. Thornton is bleeding cash every day. The longer he waits, the worse his position gets. We need to strike while he is vulnerable." Her team exchanged glances, but nodded. When Celeste set her mind to something, arguing was futile. That afternoon, news began to leak. An industry blog posted a brief item. Sources say tech billionaire Celeste Washington is eyeing Skyward Airlines for potential acquisition. Details remain scarce, but if true, this would mark a dramatic diversification for Washington innovations. Within hours, aviation forums buzzed with speculation, and Skyward's stock ticked up 3% on acquisition rumors. Harrison Thornton III called Celeste directly that evening, his southern drawl dripping with condescension. "Miss Washington, I heard you are interested in my airline. I am flattered truly, but Skyward is a family legacy. We are not interested in selling to someone outside the aviation industry." Celeste sat in her Central Park West apartment, looking out at the city lights, phone pressed to her ear. "Mr. Thornton, let me be very clear. I am offering $675 million, cash. Your family walks away debt-free and quite wealthy, or you can continue bleeding tens of millions a year until you are forced into bankruptcy and lose everything. Those are your options." Thornton sputtered, his pride wounded. "You cannot just swoop in and take what my father and grandfather built. Skyward stands for something." Celeste's voice turned icy. "It stands for discrimination and financial mismanagement. I am giving you a lifeline. I suggest you take it." Thornton hung up without another word, but Celeste knew his bankers would pressure him. Money always spoke louder than pride. "Now, before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Do you think Celeste is doing the right thing? Is she justified in using her wealth and power to buy Skyward Airlines after the way they treated her?" Comment number 1. If you believe she is absolutely right to hold them accountable, or comment number 2 if you think she is going too far. And while you are at it, hit that like button if you are rooting for Celeste, and subscribe because this story is about to get even more intense. So here is the big question. Harrison Thornton just hung up on Celeste, his pride clearly bruised, but his bankers are circling and the pressure is mounting. Will his family legacy matter more than financial survival? And what happens when Celeste takes her fight public at the biggest aviation conference of the year? Stick around, because the confrontation you are about to witness will change everything. The Aviation Leaders Summit at the Waldorf Astoria was the industry's premier gathering, where airline executives, investors, regulators, and media converged annually to discuss trends, close deals, and network over champagne and canapes. Celeste arrived on a Thursday evening wearing an emerald green gown that hugged her frame elegantly, her natural hair styled in voluminous curls, diamond earrings catching the light from crystal chandeliers overhead. She moved through the grand ballroom with the confidence of someone who belonged, even though she was acutely aware of being one of only a handful of black executives in a sea of predominantly white faces. Eyes followed her as she made her entrance. Whispers rippled through clusters of attendees. "That is Celeste Washington. I heard she wants to buy Skyward. Bold move for a tech CEO." Celeste ignored the stares and began working the room with the skill of someone who had spent years pitching investors and winning skeptics. She introduced herself to FAA officials, chatted with the CEO of a major European carrier about AI applications in flight operations, and made small talk with journalists who were clearly angling for quotes about her rumored acquisition plans. She was charming, knowledgeable, and utterly unflappable, planting seeds of credibility wherever she went. Harrison Thornton III was the evening's keynote speaker, a fact that Celeste had known when she decided to attend. Thornton was 65 years old, with silver hair, a tailored navy suit that screamed old money, and the bearing of a man accustomed to deference. As he took the stage to polite applause, Celeste found a seat in the third row directly in his line of sight. The moment he spotted her, his practiced smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before he recovered. Thornton's speech was a paean to tradition. "Skyward Airlines has been family-owned for 4 decades," he intoned his voice, carrying the smooth cadence of someone who had given this speech many times before. "We represent tradition, service, and American values. In an era of tech disruptors chasing the next shiny trend, Skyward remains committed to building lasting legacies." The subtle dig at tech companies was not lost on anyone, least of all Celeste, who sat with a slight smile taking notes on her phone. Thornton continued invoking his father and grandfather, the pioneering spirit of aviation, the importance of family stewardship. It was a performance designed to tug at heartstrings and position Skyward as something more than a business struggling to survive. During the Q&A session, a reporter from Aviation Week stood and asked Mr. Thornton, "Rumors suggest you are in talks to sell Skyward. Can you comment on whether those talks involve Miss Celeste Washington of Washington Innovations?" Thornton's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We are always open to strategic partnerships that align with our values. Skyward will remain true to its roots, regardless of external interest." Another journalist followed up. "But is it true, Miss?" "Washington has made a formal offer." Thornton forced a smile. "Miss Washington is a remarkable entrepreneur. However, running an airline requires specific expertise and understanding of a highly complex industry." Celeste raised her hand. The room went silent as people turned to look at her. Thornton had no choice but to acknowledge her. "Yes, Miss Washington, you have a question?" Celeste stood, her voice clear and steady. "You mentioned American values, Mr. Thornton. Does that include treating all passengers with equal dignity regardless of race?" Murmurs spread through the audience. Thornton's expression became guarded. "Of course. Skyward prides itself on outstanding customer service." Celeste did not let up. "Then how do you explain Flight 447 San Francisco to Denver last week? A flight where your captain told a paying first-class passenger there was no space, despite empty seats, and forced that passenger to move to economy." The murmurs grew louder. Phones came out recording the exchange. Thornton shifted uncomfortably. "I am not aware of that specific incident. If there was an error in our service, I sincerely apologize. We will investigate and address any issues." Celeste's voice gained intensity. "It was not an error. It was discrimination. And I was that passenger." The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Thornton looked genuinely flustered for the first time. "Miss Washington, if you had a negative experience, I am truly sorry. We can discuss this privately and make it right." But Celeste was not done. "I have done my own investigation, Mr. Thornton. 17 formal complaints filed with the Department of Transportation over the past 5 years. A documented pattern of racial profiling. Captain Fletcher, the pilot who removed me from first class, has been named in multiple complaints. This is not about one bad flight. This is systemic." Thornton tried to regain control. "Those are allegations, some of which have been resolved through appropriate channels." Celeste cut him off. "Resolved means you silenced victims with non-disclosure agreements and payouts. But I will not be silenced. I am offering to buy your airline, not despite this behavior, but because of it. Someone needs to clean house and restore integrity to Skyward." Thornton's face flushed red. "Skyward is not for sale to you, Miss Washington." Celeste remained calm, her voice like steel. "Your bankers disagree. Your board disagrees. You are $700 million in debt, and I am your best option, whether you like it or not." With that, Thornton abandoned the podium and walked off stage, leaving the moderator scrambling to restore order. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Reporters swarmed Celeste, shoving microphones and recorders toward her. She gave a brief statement, composed and articulate. "I believe in accountability. Discrimination has no place in any industry, and if I acquire Skyward, I will ensure that every passenger is treated with respect and dignity, period." Camera flashes popped as she spoke, and within minutes, clips of the exchange were circulating on social media. The hashtag Celeste versus Skyward began trending, with thousands of people weighing in. Civil rights organizations issued statements of support. Former Skyward passengers shared their own stories of mistreatment. Even some current Skyward employees posted anonymously about the toxic culture within the company. That evening, Leonard called with news. Thornton's bankers reached out. The board is furious with him for walking off stage. They want to negotiate. Celeste was in her hotel suite, reviewing media coverage on her laptop. "Tell them I am withdrawing my offer." Leonard sounded confused. "What? But we have been pushing for this." Celeste smiled. "Only for 24 hours. Let them panic. Let Thornton realize he has no leverage. Then we come back with a lower price." $625 million instead of $675. Leonard chuckled. Psychological warfare. I like it. They hung up and Celeste poured herself a glass of wine, feeling the thrill of the hunt. Over the next day, Harrison Thornton scrambled. He reached out to other potential buyers, but word had spread that Skyward was a PR nightmare. No one wanted to touch an airline with a discrimination scandal brewing. Private equity firms that might have overlooked the issue were spooked by the media attention and the risk of protests or boycotts. By Friday afternoon, Thornton's options had evaporated. His bankers delivered the hard truth sell to Celeste Washington or face bankruptcy within a year. Pride was expensive, and Thornton could no longer afford it. The negotiation table was set in a conference room at Sullivan and Cromwell, one of New York's most prestigious law firms. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the financial district's sunlight, streaming across a long mahogany table where two opposing sides sat like generals preparing for battle. On one side, Celeste flanked by Leonard Devon and two investment bankers from Goldman Sachs. On the other, Harrison Thornton III, his son Harrison Thornton IV, their lawyers and bankers from Morgan Stanley. The atmosphere was thick with tension, every word measured, every gesture calculated. Thornton III opened with a rehearsed formality. Miss Washington, let us be clear about one thing. If we proceed with this transaction, it is because it makes financial sense for my family, not because of your publicity stunt at the conference. Celeste met his gaze without flinching. Call it whatever helps you sleep at night, Mr. Thornton. My offer is $625 million. $50 million less than my original proposal. Thornton IV, a younger version of his father with the same silver hair beginning to appear at his temples, bristled. You cannot just reduce your offer. That is negotiating in bad faith. Celeste leaned back in her chair, exuding calm. Your stock dropped 15% since the conference. Every day you delay costs you value. I am offering you a clean exit with your dignity relatively intact. Take it or watch Skyward spiral into bankruptcy and lose everything. The bankers on both sides crunched numbers, whispering urgently to their clients. Thornton III conferred with his lawyers, his expression darkening. Finally, he countered. $650 million! And you agree to keep current management in place for a minimum of 2 years to ensure continuity. Celeste shook her head. $630 million, and I keep who I want. Management will be evaluated based on performance and values alignment. If they meet my standards, they stay. If not, they go. The room fell silent. Leonard passed Celeste a note, suggesting they might split the difference, but she ignored it. This was not just about money. It was about control. After a tense standoff, Thornton's lead banker intervened, pointing out that $630 million was still a substantial sum that would clear their debts and leave the family wealthy. Reluctantly, Thornton agreed. $635 million, and you give us a 6-month transition period. Celeste considered, then nodded. Deal. But after 6 months, I have full operational control. Hands were shaken, documents drafted, and the outline of the agreement took shape. Over the following weeks, Celeste's team conducted due diligence, diving deep into Skyward's financials, operations, legal exposure, and corporate culture. What they found was worse than expected. Accounting practices were sloppy with irregularities that suggested either incompetence or minor fraud. Maintenance logs revealed delayed repairs on several aircraft, raising safety concerns that would need immediate attention. The pilot's union contract was set to expire in 3 months, and preliminary talks had stalled, raising the specter of a potential strike that could cripple operations. Beyond discrimination lawsuits, there were injury claims from passengers, contract disputes with vendors, and a toxic work environment that had driven away talented employees. Devon compiled a report and presented it to Celeste in her office. This is a mess. We could walk away, and no one would blame us. Celeste stared out the window at the Manhattan skyline, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. No, we fix it. That is the entire point. Skyward is broken, and we are going to rebuild it into something better. Jasmine, who had been quietly analyzing operational data, spoke up. We will need to invest at least $200 million in the first year alone. New IT systems, fleet upgrades, customer service training, cultural overhaul. This is not a quick turnaround. Celeste turned to face her team. I did not expect quick. I expected hard. Let us get to work. Meanwhile, resistance was brewing inside Skyward. Captain Fletcher, upon hearing that the acquisition was moving forward, organized a group of senior pilots, mostly white men in their 50s and 60s, who had flown for Skyward for decades. They held a meeting at a Denver hotel, voices raised in anger and fear. Fletcher stood at the front of the room, his face red with indignation. We cannot let this outsider take over. She does not know aviation. She does not understand what it takes to fly. She is trying to make a point at our expense. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. One pilot asked, "What can we do? The sale is happening." Fletcher's eyes narrowed. "We make it clear that without us, Skyward cannot function. We threaten to quit en masse. We go to the media and tell them this acquisition is about ego, not business." Fletcher followed through, reaching out to Aviation Weekly for an interview. The article ran with the headline, "Veteran Pilot Questions Washington's Motives in Skyward Acquisition." In it, Fletcher was quoted saying, "Miss Washington had one bad experience, and now she is destroying a legacy. She has no airline experience, no understanding of the complexities involved. This is petty and vindictive, and it will hurt employees and passengers alike." The article gained traction, shared widely in aviation circles, and cited by conservative media outlets as an example of political correctness run amok. Celeste read the article in her office and felt a familiar burn of anger. But instead of responding privately, she took to Twitter, where her 2 million followers awaited. She typed, "Captain Fletcher says, I am destroying a legacy. Let us talk about his legacy: discriminating against passengers, silencing complaints, protecting a broken culture. I am not destroying anything. I am rebuilding. Starting with accountability." The tweet went viral within hours, retweeted tens of thousands of times, sparking a national conversation about racism in the airline industry. To Celeste's surprise, dozens of Skyward employees began speaking out in her support. Flight attendants, ground crew mechanics, many of them people of color, posted messages on social media and sent emails to her company. Finally, someone who will stand up for us. I have witnessed the discrimination firsthand and been powerless to stop it. Thank you for giving us hope that things can change. The tide of public opinion shifted decisively in Celeste's favor, and Fletcher's gambit backfired. Instead of rallying support, he had exposed the very culture Celeste intended to dismantle. The FAA hearing was held in a drab government building in Washington, D.C., a far cry from the opulence of the Waldorf Astoria, but infinitely more consequential. The hearing room was packed with journalists, industry observers, Skyward employees, both for and against the acquisition, and representatives from civil rights organizations. At the front, a panel of 5 FAA officials sat behind a raised dais, led by Deputy Administrator Margaret Chen, an Asian-American woman in her 60s, with steel-gray hair and a reputation for fairness tempered with strictness. The hearing began with procedural remarks before diving into the substance. Margaret Chen addressed the room. "We are here to determine whether the proposed transfer of ownership of Skyward Airlines from Thornton Aviation Group to Washington Innovations Holdings, controlled by Miss Celeste Washington, serves the public interest and meets all regulatory requirements. Both proponents and opponents will have an opportunity to testify." The first witnesses were financial analysts who walked through Washington Innovations' balance sheet, demonstrating that the company had sufficient capital to support the acquisition and sustain operations. Then came aviation consultants who testified about the feasibility of integrating tech solutions into airline management. But the real drama began when Captain Fletcher was called to testify. He approached the witness stand in full uniform, his pilot wings gleaming under fluorescent lights, projecting an image of competence and authority. After being sworn in, his lawyer asked him to describe his career. Fletcher spoke with practiced ease. "I have flown for Skyward Airlines for 28 years. I have logged over 20,000 flight hours without a single accident. I know this airline inside and out, from the mechanics of the planes to the needs of our passengers." The panel asked about the discrimination complaints. Fletcher's expression remained neutral. "Those complaints are exaggerated. In my experience, we treat all passengers equally. Sometimes operational needs require seat changes. It has nothing to do with race." Margaret Chen leaned forward. Captain Fletcher, can you address the specific incident involving Miss Washington on Flight 447? Fletcher nodded. That flight had a legitimate overbooking situation. I made a decision based on operational factors, including passenger seniority and frequent flyer status. Miss Washington unfortunately misunderstood the situation. It was not personal. Devin Wright, representing Celeste, was given an opportunity to cross-examine. He stood holding a tablet with meticulously organized data. Captain Fletcher, in your last 500 flights, how many times have you moved white first-class passengers to economy due to overbooking? Fletcher hesitated. I do not keep personal track of every decision, Devin pressed. We do. 0 times. But you have moved passengers of color 12 times under similar circumstances. Can you explain that pattern? Fletcher's composure cracked slightly. That is coincidence. I do not see color when I make operational decisions. Devin's voice remained calm but firm. You do not see color, yet you questioned Miss Washington's ticket 3 separate times during boarding, something you did not do for any white passengers that day. Explain that. Fletcher stammered, his face flushing. I was ensuring proper procedures. Devin held up printed screenshots of internal communications. We have emails from Skyward Management instructing crew to prioritize passengers based on appearance and to use discretion in seating assignments. That is code for discrimination, is it not? Fletcher had no good answer, and his testimony ended in disarray. Next, representatives from the pilots' union testified expressing concern about job security under new ownership. They argued that Celeste's lack of aviation experience posed risks. But when Devin produced letters of support from over 200 Skyward employees, many describing a hostile work environment and pleading for change, the union's argument lost force. The hearing broke for lunch, and when it resumed, Celeste took the stand. She walked to the witness chair with quiet confidence, dressed in a navy blue suit that conveyed professionalism without ostentation. After being sworn in, Margaret Chen asked Miss Washington, why should the FAA approve your acquisition of Skyward Airlines? Celeste looked directly at the panel. Because I represent the future of aviation, an industry that should welcome everyone, not just those who look a certain way. She outlined her plan: inject $200 million in capital to upgrade the fleet and modernize IT systems. Hire Catherine Morris, a respected former COO of United Airlines, to serve as President and Chief Operating Officer. Implement mandatory bias training for all employees. Establish transparent complaint processes with third-party oversight. And commit to diversifying hiring at all levels. Chen pressed her. You are a tech CEO. What qualifies you to run an airline? Celeste did not shy away from the question. I know. Systems efficiency and people. I built a billion-dollar company from nothing by hiring the best talent, listening to experts, and holding everyone accountable. I will do the same with Skyward. I bring capital, strategic vision, and a commitment to ethical operations. What I lack in airline-specific experience, I will supplement by surrounding myself with industry veterans like Catherine Morris. She paused, then added, but I also bring something Skyward has lacked: accountability. Then Celeste recounted her experience on Flight 447. Her voice remained steady, but emotion seeped through as she described the humiliation of being questioned repeatedly, the dismissiveness of Captain Fletcher, the forced move to economy, while white passengers remained comfortable in first class. This was not about an overbooking. This was about them deciding I did not belong. And when I looked into Skyward's history, I realized my experience was not unique. 17 formal complaints, dozens more informal ones. A pattern of discrimination that management ignored or covered up. I am not acquiring Skyward for revenge. I am doing it to ensure no one else has to endure what I did. The public gallery was silent, except for a few stifled sobs. Even some of the FAA panel members appeared moved. Celeste presented data showing Skyward's poor performance metrics, customer satisfaction scores in the bottom quartile, on-time performance lagging competitors, employee turnover 30% higher than industry average. I will turn this airline around, not just financially, but ethically. because I believe those two goals are not only compatible, but essential to each other. After Celeste stepped down, media outlets aired clips of her testimony across every major network. Public opinion polls showed 72% of Americans supported her acquisition. Civil rights leaders held a press conference praising her courage. Even some pilots, younger ones, who had felt marginalized by the old guard, broke ranks and publicly endorsed the change. Captain Fletcher gave a defensive interview, but his words rang hollow against the weight of evidence and Celeste's compelling narrative. 2 weeks later, the FAA panel convened for their decision. Margaret Chen read from a prepared statement. After thorough review of financial records, operational plans, and public testimony, the Federal Aviation Administration approves the transfer of ownership of Skyward Airlines to Washington Innovations Holdings, LLC, controlled by Miss Celeste Washington. This approval is contingent upon maintaining all safety standards, honoring existing labor agreements with good faith renegotiation, and submitting quarterly operational reports to the FAA for a period of 2 years. Celeste, watching via video conference from New York, felt relief wash over her. It was official. Skyward was hers. The press conference was held at a Denver hotel chosen because Skyward's headquarters was based in the city, and Celeste wanted to make her first major statement as owner on the company's home turf. The ballroom was filled with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. Celeste stood at a podium emblazoned with the Washington Innovations logo, flanked by Catherine Morris and Leonard Torres. She wore a burgundy blazer and spoke with the conviction of someone who had fought for this moment. Today marks a new chapter. Celeste began her voice clear and strong. For Skyward Airlines, for our employees, and for the aviation industry, we are going to prove that excellence and equity go hand in hand. Skyward has struggled in recent years, both financially and ethically. That ends now. We will invest in our fleet, upgrade our technology, and most importantly, transform our culture. Every employee will be treated with respect. Every passenger will be welcomed. Discrimination has no place at Skyward, and anyone who cannot embrace that vision will need to find employment elsewhere. The Thornton family issued a brief statement through their publicist, Gracious in Defeat. We wish Miss Washington every success and trust she will honor the legacy of Skyward Airlines. Stock markets reacted with cautious optimism. Washington Innovations stock dipped 2% as analysts worried about the risks of diversification, but it recovered within days as investors recognized the potential upside. Meanwhile, Skyward employees braced for change, some excited, others terrified. Celeste's first day as owner was orchestrated for maximum impact. She flew to Denver and drove to Skyward's headquarters, a modest campus of low-slung buildings near the airport. Employees had been summoned to an all-hands meeting in the largest hangar where planes were usually serviced. Hundreds gathered, a mix of pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, ground crew, administrative staff. The mood was tense, whispers echoing off the high metal ceiling. When Celeste walked in, flanked by Catherine Morris and Jasmine Lee, a hush fell. Celeste climbed onto a makeshift stage and took the microphone. I know many of you are worried. Change is hard, but change is necessary. Skyward has lost its way. Together, we are going to find it again. She announced immediate initiatives. Catherine Morris would serve as president and chief operating officer, bringing decades of airline experience to stabilize operations. Lorraine Phillips, a former NAACP legal director, would join as chief diversity officer, tasked with overhauling policies and training. An anonymous hotline would be established for employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation. Mandatory bias training would begin within a month, starting with pilots and customer-facing staff. And she committed to $200 million in capital investment over the next year, including new aircraft orders and IT infrastructure upgrades. Reactions were mixed. Younger employees and people of color applauded enthusiastically, sensing genuine change. Older employees, particularly those aligned with the previous management, stood with arms crossed, skeptical. Captain Fletcher was in the back, glaring. After the speech, Celeste met with HR and began reviewing personnel files. The pattern was undeniable. Management was overwhelmingly white and male, while diversity existed only at lower-level positions. She promoted talented individuals who had been overlooked. Keisha, the flight attendant who had shown Celeste's sympathy on that awful flight, was elevated to supervisor of in-flight services. Luis Rivera, a Hispanic mechanic with stellar performance reviews but no upward mobility, became maintenance chief. Rajesh Kumar, an Indian-American financial analyst, was named CFO of the Skyward division. Each promotion sent a message merit mattered and barriers were falling. Simultaneously, Celeste offered generous early retirement packages to executives who had enabled the old culture. Most took the deal unwilling to face the scrutiny and accountability she demanded. But Captain Fletcher resisted. He was called to a meeting with Catherine Morris and HR in a private conference room. Catherine, a no-nonsense woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes, wasted no time. "Captain Fletcher, we are offering you early retirement with full pension and benefits. This is a generous offer." Fletcher's face reddened. "You cannot fire me. I have a union contract." Catherine nodded. "We are not firing you. We are offering you a choice. Retire with dignity and financial security or stay and face reopened investigations into the 17 complaints that name you. We will follow every procedural requirement, but I assure you those investigations will be thorough." Fletcher realized he was trapped. Before he could respond, Celeste entered the room. The two locked eyes, and the air crackled with tension. Fletcher spat. "This is your revenge, is it not?" Celeste's voice was calm but unyielding. "It is not revenge, it is accountability. You treated passengers like me as if we did not belong in first class, as if we were inconveniences to be dealt with rather than valued customers. You created a culture where discrimination thrived. Now you do not belong here." Fletcher signed the retirement papers with a trembling hand and left without another word, his career ending not in celebration but in shame. News of the leadership changes spread quickly. Headlines read, "Celeste Washington cleans house at Skyward and new era begins for troubled airline." Some critics labeled her actions as vindictive, but most saw them as necessary. Within 60 days, the transformation became measurable. Customer complaint rates dropped 40%. Employee satisfaction surveys conducted anonymously showed significant improvement. Skyward began winning awards, Most Improved Airline from a consumer advocacy group, recognition for diversity initiatives from the NAACP. The fleet modernization plan attracted positive attention from industry analysts who had been skeptical. 6 months into ownership, Skyward posted its first profitable quarter in 3 years, a modest gain but a symbolic victory. Celeste was featured on magazine covers. Times cover read, "The CEO who flew her own way," while Forbes titled their profile, "When Justice Meets Business." She gave interviews explaining her philosophy that treating people with dignity was not just morally right, but economically smart, that diverse teams made better decisions, that accountability improved performance. One afternoon, Celeste's daughter Amara visited and flew on Skyward for the first time since the acquisition. She boarded in New York, heading to San Francisco, and was seated in first class. The flight attendants, now trained in the new culture, were warm and professional. Amara looked around the cabin, noting the diversity among crew and passengers, the sense of professionalism and respect. When she arrived in San Francisco, she called her mother. "Mom, I flew Skyward today. It felt different." "Better. You did this." Celeste felt tears prick her eyes. "I did it for you, baby. For your generation." 6 months into ownership, Celeste had reason to feel proud. Skyward was on track for a full-year profit of $120 million, a stunning turnaround that silenced most critics. Customer loyalty had surged, with repeat bookings up 50%. Employee retention had improved dramatically, turnover dropping by 30%. A new marketing campaign, Skyward Where Everyone Belongs, featured real employees and passengers of diverse backgrounds, and it resonated powerfully with the public. Celeste had proven that her vision was not naive idealism, but sound business strategy. But success attracted predators. Horizon Airways, a larger competitor, took notice of Skyward's resurgence. Horizon's CEO Gerald Whitfield was a cutthroat businessman in his 60s, known for aggressive expansion through acquisitions. He saw opportunity. Whitfield approached Celeste with an offer $850 million for Skyward, a 30% profit in just 6 months. "You have done remarkable work turning it around," he said during a phone call. "But let us be honest, Miss Washington. You are a tech CEO, not an airline operator. Sell to us, take your profit, and return to what you do best." Celeste did not hesitate. "It is not for sale." Whitfield chuckled condescendingly. "Everything is for sale at the right price. Think about your shareholders at Washington Innovations. They invested in a tech company, not an airline. You are exposing them to unnecessary risk." But Celeste refused to budge, and Whitfield grew frustrated. He changed tactics, going directly to Washington Innovations shareholders. As a publicly traded company, Washington Innovations was vulnerable to shareholder pressure. Whitfield lobbied institutional investors, arguing that Celeste was using company resources for a personal vendetta, prioritizing ego over returns. Some shareholders, particularly large institutional funds focused solely on short-term gains, agreed. They filed a lawsuit in Delaware, the state where Washington Innovations was incorporated, claiming breach of fiduciary duty. The lawsuit alleged that Celeste had acquired Skyward for emotional rather than business reasons, and that her refusal to sell at a significant profit harmed shareholder value. Media coverage was intense. Headlines asked, "Is Celeste Washington's airline adventure costing shareholders?" Washington Innovations' stock price dropped 8% on the news, and analysts debated whether Celeste had overstepped. The case went to trial in a federal courtroom in Wilmington, Delaware. The courtroom was smaller than the FAA hearing room, but no less significant. Judge Patricia Caldwell, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for cutting through rhetoric, presided. Whitfield testified first, laying out his case. Miss Washington bought Skyward because she was personally offended. That is not a sound business rationale. She has turned down an offer that would deliver substantial returns to shareholders. She is prioritizing her feelings over her fiduciary duty. His testimony was polished, calculated to appeal to the judge's sense of corporate responsibility. Celeste's legal team countered by presenting Skyward's financial turnaround. Leonard Torres testified about profitability projections, demonstrating that Skyward was now worth more than what Celeste had paid and would continue to appreciate in value. Jasmine Lee testified about operational improvements and synergies between Washington Innovations technology and Skyward's operations, but Judge Caldwell remained skeptical. "Miss Washington," she said when Celeste took the stand, "the question before this court is whether personal motivation drove this acquisition in a way that violates your duty to shareholders. Be honest. Did emotion play a role?" Celeste did not flinch. This was the moment the story had been building toward the courtroom scene from the very beginning. "Yes, Your Honor. Personal motivation drove it. I was humiliated on Flight 447. I was treated as if I did not belong in first class because of the color of my skin. That humiliation was real, and it was painful." She paused, letting the admission hang in the air. "But that humiliation opened my eyes to a systemic problem. Skyward was not just failing me. It was failing thousands of passengers and its own employees. It was failing financially because it was failing ethically. And solving systemic problems is good business." Celeste pulled up a presentation on the courtroom screen. "When I acquired Skyward, it was valued at $550 million and losing money every quarter. Today, it is valued at over $800 million and profitable. Customer satisfaction has soared. Employee retention has improved. We have won industry awards. Brand value has increased exponentially. I did not buy Skyward for revenge. I bought it because I saw potential. Potential to prove that treating people with dignity is not just right, it is profitable." Judge Caldwell asked Whitfield, "Mr. Whitfield, why do you want to acquire Skyward?" Whitfield responded smoothly, "To integrate it into Horizon's network, achieve cost synergies, and maximize shareholder value." The judge pressed. Cost synergies often mean layoffs. "How many jobs would you cut?" Whitfield hesitated. "We would need to eliminate redundancies, perhaps 15 to 20% of the workforce." The judge leaned back. "So, Miss Washington has created value, jobs, and positive social impact, while you propose to extract value by cutting jobs. Case dismissed." As Celeste left the courthouse, a middle-aged white man approached her cautiously. His name was Tim, a mechanic who had worked for Skyward for 15 years. "Miss Washington, I need to tell you something." Captain Fletcher was not acting alone. There was a directive. Celeste stopped her attention fully on him. What directive? Tim pulled a folded document from his jacket and handed it to her. It was an internal memo dated 2 years earlier, signed by Harrison Thornton III. The memo read, "To all department heads, prioritize premium members in all service decisions. Use discretion in seating assignments and upgrades. Maintain cabin standards that reflect Skyward's tradition." The language was coded, but the meaning was clear. Discriminate based on appearance. Prioritize white passengers. Maintain a certain image. Celeste stared at the document, anger and vindication swirling inside her. Thornton had not just allowed discrimination, he had institutionalized it. She could pursue legal action, drag him through courts, extract settlements. But what would that accomplish? Thornton was powerless now, his airline sold, his reputation tarnished. Instead, Celeste made a different choice. She released the memo to the public with a statement, "This is why change was necessary." Discrimination was not the act of rogue employees. It was policy. Skyward is now under new management, with new values. The memo sparked outrage and calls for investigations, but Celeste moved on. She had more important work to do. A few weeks later, she boarded a Skyward flight from New York to Los Angeles, traveling in first class. Keisha, now a supervisor, greeted her at the door. "Welcome aboard, Miss Washington. It is an honor to have you fly with us." Celeste smiled warmly. "The honor is mine, Keisha. Thank you for everything you do." As she settled into her seat, a young black girl in the row behind her whispered loudly to her mother, "Mommy, is that the lady who owns the airline?" The mother smiled and nodded. "Yes, baby, that is her." The girl leaned forward and waved shyly. Celeste turned and waved back, her heart swelling. The plane pushed back from the gate and taxied toward the runway. As it lifted into the sky, Celeste looked out the window at the city shrinking below the clouds, stretching endlessly ahead. She thought about the journey, the humiliation that had sparked everything, the fight she had waged, the victory she had won. A voiceover of her own thoughts filled her mind, as if narrating the story for those who would hear it. They said, "There was no space for me, so I made space." Not just for me, but for everyone who has ever been told they do not belong. Because when you have power, you have a choice. You can use it to exclude, or you can use it to include. I chose inclusion, and that has made all the difference. So what do you think? Did Celeste make the right choices throughout this journey? Do you believe justice and business can truly coexist, or is one always sacrificed for the other? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And here is my question for you. If you were in Celeste's position with the resources and the opportunity, would you have done the same thing? Comment absolutely if you would, or no way if you think you would have taken a different path. If this story inspired you, moved you, or made you think differently about power and accountability, please hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories about real people making real change in the world. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who has ever felt like they did not belong, someone who believes in fighting for what is right. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for caring about stories that matter. Remember, change does not happen by accident. It happens because people like Celeste and maybe people like you decide that enough is enough. Until next time, keep fighting for justice, keep believing in a better world, and never let anyone tell you there is no space for you. Fly high. Celeste Washington's journey from humiliated passenger to airline owner teaches us profound truths about power, justice, and transformation. First, discrimination thrives in silence. When institutions face no consequences for mistreatment, patterns become policies. Celeste refused to be silenced, understanding that her voice could amplify the voices of countless others who suffered similar indignities. Second, accountability and profitability are not enemies, but allies. Skyward's financial struggles were symptoms of deeper ethical rot. By addressing discrimination, improving culture, and respecting employees, Celeste proved that treating people with dignity drives business success. Third, power is a tool that reveals character. Celeste could have sued, accepted settlements, or simply avoided Skyward forever. Instead, she wielded her resources to create systemic change, demonstrating that wealth carries responsibility. Fourth change requires courage and persistence. From the FAA hearings to shareholder lawsuits, Celeste faced relentless opposition. She prevailed because she never lost sight of her mission. Finally, representation matters profoundly. That young black girl seeing Celeste as an airline owner will grow up believing she too can achieve anything. Celeste did not just buy an airline. She bought possibility, proving that when we make space for ourselves, we make space for generations to come. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced discrimination while traveling or in any public space? How did it make you feel? And what did you do about it? Share your story in the comments below, because your voice matters. If Celeste's courage inspired you to stand up against injustice in your own life, comment, "I'm inspired," so we can build a community of changemakers together. Did this story change how you think about power and responsibility? Let me know. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like this, stories that challenge the status quo and prove that one person can make a difference, then please hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because we share powerful true stories every week that will move you, inspire you, and remind you that change is possible. Share this video with your friends, your family, on social media, anywhere you think it will spark important conversations. Thank you so much for watching, for engaging, and for believing in a world where everyone belongs. May you always have the courage to stand up for what is right, the wisdom to use your power for good, and the determination to create the change you wish to see. Until next time, keep fighting, keep believing, and never let anyone tell you there is no space for you. You deserve to fly first class in every area of your life.